Hello and welcome to this video in which we look at the Cambridge C1 Use of English Part 1. Today we are focusing on vocab, collocations and context, the common question types for Part 1. Part 1 there are 8 questions as we can see here and it's multiple choice. I would not recommend the B strategy. If you're lucky you'll get 25%, if you're very lucky maybe 37.5, but not enough to pass because you need 60%, 5 out of 8. Although you should maybe be aiming for more because Part 1 tends to be a bit easier in my experience than other parts. Okay, let's get into this with some activities, some tips and tricks for Part 1. So in general, how do you approach this part of the exam? You're sitting there in the exam, Part 1 looks at you, what do you say? Well, obvious tip, but read the title. Get an idea of what the text is about. They can be a bit predictable. They're like typical topics, you know? And once you get familiar with the idea of this typical topic, it might be easier to think what the answer is. It's easier to read. It's not like you're thinking, I always think like sometimes I'm reading a text and it's very foggy, it's unclear. But if you have a clear idea of the topic, then you're not going to get that experience. In general, it's going to be easier. A good example, the typical C1 text, some type of exercise, some strange type of exercise from some weird Scandinavian country or something. Well, you can more or less guess. It's going to talk about benefits. It's going to describe some study that was carried out. They always do this in the Cambridge exam, in the C1 exam. And once you've got this clear idea, it's going to help you with the individual answers because you know what ideas it's trying to express. Questions often cover vocab, so words that are similar, but you need to find the right one. Collocations, typical words that go together. And context, which is where this is not just a grammar exam, it's also a reading exam because you need to understand the ideas, the clues, so you can choose the right word. That's why it's a clever exam. So we're going to focus on this with some activities. We're starting with some context clues. So we've got some questions here. Feel free to pause the video and do them yourself. The first thing you need to do is say why this is wrong. These are all wrong. The underlined words are all wrong. Can you tell me why? Then part 2, can you replace them with the correct word, the word that would probably be in the exam? Obviously, you'll have options in the exam, but these would be some of the wrong options. You need to think of the right option. So pause the video if you want for a second, do it yourself. Why is it wrong? What is the correct answer? And welcome back. Let's go through these. So number 1, work is uncountable. You cannot have a good work. You can do some good work, or you can be working well and so on, but it doesn't work because you're talking about work in general. The word, of course, is job. It's a good job. Number 2, count Harriet to be willing. Sounds sort of okay, but it's not quite right because there's a better word. Count doesn't work because you can count on someone to be willing. You trust someone. So here, this is typical part 1. The prepositions matter. Count would not be the correct option because there's no preposition. If it said on, then count would be a correct option. So paying attention to what prepositions go with which words. Number 3 is similar. Worry to ask. No, that doesn't work. Worry to, it doesn't exist. I'm worried to, struggling to think of how we'd use that in a sentence. You worry about something. And then it's going to be hesitate to, because you hesitate. Don't hesitate to, typical letter expression or public, public customer service. Explain you. This phrase always makes me laugh because it makes me think of somebody explaining my essence. Who am I? What am I doing in life? You can't explain someone. You explain a thing, not a person. You could maybe explain to them, or more simply, you could tell them. Tell you how to get to the conference. Number 5, a more typical one. That long train travel. No, travel is normally a verb. Sometimes it's not when we're talking about my travels in general, but normally it's going to be a verb. We need the noun, trip or journey, much more common. And number 6, similar as before, a police. No, the police is the organization, not an individual. The individual would be a detective, a police officer or something like that to find that dastardly person who stole your bike. So this is where we're thinking a bit grammatical, but a bit about context, a bit of understanding the sentence so we know what kind of word we need. Part 2 of part 1, collocations. What words typically go together? You can find lots of exercises like this. You can find common collocations in English. This is a great one because what you need to do in this exercise is find the odd one out. The one that doesn't go with, in number 1, give. We can do one together. Give a party. Yeah, you can give a party. But which one can't you do? This means then that you are learning 3 correct collocations and 1 wrong. Try to forget the wrong one, remember the 3 right ones, putting them in your notes because they're all, they're not the most common collocations, but they're possible on a C1 exam. It's expected that you have read widely enough to recognize these kind of collocations. So go ahead and do the exercise, pause the video if you want. And let's do the answers. We're ready for the answers, aren't we? Number 1, you can't give a mistake. You make a mistake, of course. The other ones you can give. A nice smile. That was probably fake, but give someone a smile. To lay, you can lay an egg. It can be laid. You can lay the blame. What you can't lay is an excuse. You can make an excuse or give an excuse. Number 3, what do you make? You don't make the washing up, do you? Make means create in general, something more creative, something you're fabricating. Washing up is a process that you should do every day. I don't believe in dishwashers. That's just part of my personal philosophy, but I like doing the washing up every day, listening to a podcast. I do the washing up because it's a process that I do. Number 4, what do you pay? You pay attention. You don't pay a ticket. Normally, you would pay for a ticket because you're paying for something. I mean, maybe if it's like a parking ticket in American English, we paid the ticket. But if we're talking about a concert ticket, you pay for an item. You can pay tribute to someone, meaning you pay homage to them, or homage. And you can pay a compliment, meaning give a compliment. Number 5, what do you run? Well, there are many things you can run, but you can't run an exercise. Running is a type of exercise, but the other things are things you run, operate, manage, the meaning of run. To shoot, you can shoot a film, make a film, shoot a target, shoot an arrow, but you can't shoot a camera. You can shoot things using a camera. To stand, this is a nice one because now we're getting a bit more abstract, a bit more difficult for C1. You don't stand a possibility. It's very similar to chance, meaning often using the negative, he didn't stand a chance. You didn't have any possibility. It was very unlikely. And you can stand trial when you go to court for something you did, or you can stand for parliament, like standing for election, because you are imagining yourself standing up saying, yes, vote for me. What's it from Hunger Games? I stand, I give tribute or whatever it's called. And finally, a bit of an easy one. You take care of someone, take turns, take a chance on me. Honey, I'm still free. But you can't take a promise. You can make a promise. Okay, so there's lots of nice collocations. I've explained them a bit. Have you understood? Can you use them? Here's a little exercise where you need to use these collocations that you have hopefully been writing in your notes in the sentence. So we're getting into the exam where you're thinking, okay, I've got my idea. How do the words I've learned fit in? So here you've got 8 sentences where you need to use some of the collocations, 1 from each question from the previous activity. They should be in your notes. Take a minute to do this if you would like to. And here are the answers. Laying the blame on people, blaming people. A robbery of a bank, you would stand trial. If you don't want to wake your parents, you don't want to make a noise. He's a professor, he's going to give a lecture, because at university, professors give lectures. Playing nicely means taking turns. An advertising agency would run a campaign. A minister would make a speech to pay tribute to our brave boys, our brave soldiers. And what does Paul do for his boss? He makes travel arrangements, because Paul is the secretary, so he's making these arrangements. Okay, let's keep going. We have got some common verbs. These ones are slightly different because these are like the really common verbs, as you can see, spend, have, make, all these really common ones. But there's phrases might be a bit more specific. The verbs are common, but the phrases have a very specific meaning. So same as before, lots more collocations. Pause it if you want. We'll go through the answers in a second. And these are the answers. So number 1's a bit of a trick, isn't it? Because you see time and you think spend time, but not a time. It's have a good time, had a really great time. What do you do with friends? You make friends. Oh, that one is very easy. This one I think I've talked about before, but you take steps. Number 4 is a really common one. The answer is drew, because drew has this meaning of drew has this meaning of pull. So I'm pulling your attention to a crack in the wall. Some adjectives, large amount. This is just what sounds best. It's the most common way of saying it. The other ones, a big amount, I don't think it's grammatically wrong, but large amount is the common way of saying it. They want to know that you know the common way of saying it. 6 is similar. Like these are all, you don't want to think about this too much, because when I start thinking about it too much, they all sound possible. But the ordinary person, this is the one that sounds most normal. That sounds like my baby waking up, so we might have to take a break in a second and see what's happening. The CEO will a meeting, you attend a meeting, and you do sport. You don't practice sport. Practice sport is a very strange thing, but do sport, practicing. I'm practicing. I've finally managed to learn how to do sport. I've been practicing for a long time. No, you just do sport. Okay, let's leave it there and we'll come back in a bit. Okay, let's get back into this. 5 hours later, with the baby happy and asleep again. So we've got these common verb collocations that you need to learn. You can study these. You can search for do, make, get, activities, collocations. That's the keyword. That's the skill I'm trying to give you. Google ESL, English, C1, collocations, anything like that. You'll find plenty of exercises. Keep detailed notes of all these phrases that you're learning. Okay, I think we've got one more typical activity, then we'll get a bit more creative. This one's more of a vocab activity. We've got words that seem like they could fit, but only one of them is the normal phrase, the word that fits the sentence, the word that fits the context, and so on. It's just knowing vocab. So again, pause, do it yourself, and let's go through the answers. So the first one, we've got a party, and it's going to be the social, the answer is event. Is there an explanation for this? It's an event, it's a party, we refer to this as the social event of the year. The other ones don't really fit based on what they mean. Number 2, this one is a lot easier. Someone teaches you how to drive a car. That's context, isn't it? I teach you, you learn from me. The other words are related but don't fit understanding that sentence. Number 3, super common C1 phrase, an area of expertise. Expertise, also on part 3, always thinking about the different parts of the exam. Expert, expertise. But area of expertise is the phrase you'll find on part 1. Number 4, another great C1 expression, a wide range. Wide range is the collocation. A bit like vast majority, wide range. They just go together. Number 5 is a super typical Cambridge trick. A country has economic problems because economic means referring to the economy. Economical means not using very much. My car is very economical because it doesn't use very much petrol. And number 6, a flat could be, this one, honestly, this is one of those that is like 50-50 depending on the day. If it's closer, I guess it's more convenient. I think you could say practical. More practical, more convenient. It's a bit of a 50-50 one. Sometimes you can have questions like this and you might not get all of them right. They both sort of fit, to be honest. But there we go. Let's say convenient because we're talking about how convenient it is to get to school. So those are some typical exercises that you might find online that you can practice for part 1, keeping notes on all of them. Now, as I said, a bit more creative. I think a really important way to practice is to take ownership of the exam, of your learning. This means making your own activity. What I found here, I think this text was from an old exam, but I put the answers back in and then I can give it to my students and say, okay, delete 4 of the words and then give me 4 options for each word, thinking about how they make part 1. Which word would be deleted? What would the other options be? Make your own exam, give it to a partner, and then they can do it and you can learn when you're making it and also when you're doing it. You can find a text like this anywhere. Breaking News English is a great website that's got this kind of length texts on lots of different topics, and they're gonna, the Cambridge exam uses normal English language, so any authentic English language source is good practice for it. So how would you do this exactly? Well, I printed it. I printed it in light grey. If we're doing this in person, and I print it in light grey to save a bit of ink, being economical. And then you can cross out the words, 4 in this case, more if you can do it. 4 options for each for words that could go there. Obviously, 3 of them will be plausible, but they must be incorrect. There must be a reason why this doesn't fit, like we've seen before. The preposition's not right. The meaning is slightly different. It's a related word, but it's not good in that sentence. Then obviously one of the answers will be the correct one, the one you crossed out, the one you deleted if you're doing it on a computer. Then it should look like a real exam, like we'll see in a minute. Example from that one I have just shown you. An important invention was the A, B, C, or D. Obviously, it could be any of those. They're all inventions. Maybe from the context you get that it's microscope, but grammatically they're all correct, so it's not a very good one. Or this one, what kind of objects? Okay, I need an adjective, but tiny, small, microscopic are all adjectives. We don't know which one it's going to be. It could be any. There needs to be a specific reason why it's the correct answer. And when you figure out that reason, that is you understanding how to do part 1 of the C1 exam. That's why I think this is a useful exercise. It's a great way to practice. You can do this from reading a book, thinking about why the word was chosen, why it couldn't be, exactly what I'm saying. You can make a fun one. It doesn't have to be a typical C1, it could be a text that's more interesting, something that you are passionate about on the subject you're interested in. Send it to a friend, send it to me if we're doing classes. That doesn't make me your friend though. So in the end, you've got one that looks like a real exam that looks like this, which again, we can do together. Since we've been building up to this is your final exam. This one is the old exam. It's got more questions, the one from before 2015. But it's good practice because it's more practice. And it was maybe slightly more difficult back in the day, back in the olden times when they used to hit the students if they got a wrong answer. So it has to be a more difficult exam. So anyway, it's a very typical topic. It's sort of scientific, talking about studies, psychological, social, all that kind of thing. And we can see it's about why people laugh. I don't know why, but whenever I walk into a room, people start laughing. Why is that? This is what this text is trying to figure out. So we can see, number 1, we need laughter in our lives. There's a rise of stress and loneliness. That strange sound that we make can't be the to such problems. Well, I'll give you some time to read it. And you've got the first 6 options here. And then we'll go through the answers. Number 1 is going to be answer. From the context, this is the answer to a problem. Laughter being the answer to the problems of stress and loneliness. You have an answer to a problem. Response sort of sounds possible, but response isn't a solution. And we're talking about a solution to these problems. Number 2, a stroll. Super typical. You know it or you don't. The expression, that means going for a walk. The expression, that means going for a walk, is to take a stroll. It's a collocation. Take goes with stroll. And we can do this for the rest of these. Number 3 is going to be purpose, because this serves a purpose. I will just go through the rest of them now. Prompt, meaning things that cause something, that trigger something, that provoke something. Number 5 was do, because this must be another collocation. It has nothing to do with something. Nothing to do, meaning it's not related at all. Here they've said little to do, so they've changed it a bit to make it more difficult, but it's the same expression. If something has nothing to do with something, it is not related. This is the expression that you are learning, that you need to know how to use. And number 6, that one was a bit more of a complex understanding one. It's the root of the problem, meaning it's the fundamental heart, the center of the problem. For the rest of these, you cannot capture laughter in the lab. Well, if you can't capture it in the lab, that's going to be authentic, because they're talking about real laughter, not in the lab. Because you place something under scrutiny, like put something under scrutiny, place something under scrutiny. It's the expression, that's the meaning. I keep doing that. Old habits. An episode is defined as the comment, so that's defined. Number 10, always talking about studies and data in C1 text. The data revealed some facts. And then this laughter virtually disappears, meaning it almost all disappears. That's the meaning of virtually, almost completely. And the last one, this is a little bit similar to number 7. You would fake a laugh. The verb to fake something, you would fake a laugh. Okay, my final note on part 1. How do you keep practicing at home? Like I've shown you before with text that you can find, this is the last book I read, a recommendation from a fellow teacher, a very, very interesting book called Hamnet about Shakespeare's son. And here is one of maybe the opening passage, the first passage. And as I was reading it, I was thinking, okay, what expressions here would I find on a C1 exam part 1? And in the very first 100 words, I found 3 expressions that I think I could imagine that being on C1 part 1. So when I'm reading, I'm thinking, what do I need to know if I'm studying C1? So we can see, look, the highlighted words. Takes, because as I've said before, take a step. And in fact, take each step. So even making it a bit more complicated. Very nice. To stumble, like ways of walking, ways of moving, could be on the exam a lot. He's going down the stairs and he stumbles, falling to his knees. So it must be stumbling, as in slightly falling, because it's falling after that. That's my clue. The clue is in the text, like in a real exam, except this is just a bit of a book that I found. And finally, a bit more of a pure vocab one, strips of light. There are strips of light coming into the room. Well, this sort of fits with slashed, as in long, thin pieces of light. So we might find like words that are different shapes, different ways of describing things could be set on the exam. Then what I would do is I would be thinking, okay, number 1, takes. Other options. Well, take is a very common verb, so it could be one of those common collocation verbs, do, make, get, have, put, all these kind of things. Number 2, stumbles. Here it's a bit more difficult, I'll be honest. I used a thesaurus for this, but I'm sure you've got a subscription to a thesaurus as well. It's cheaper than Netflix nowadays to get a subscription to a good thesaurus. So go to your local thesaurus subscription service and find some words that are similar. Shuffles, meaning to move a bit awkwardly and slowly. Tilt, meaning to move at an angle. Or trudges, meaning to move with difficulty. They're all ways of moving, possibly downstairs, but stumbles is the one that fits because of the clue we saw. And the last one, strips of light. Well, I'm thinking of like shapes. A slab, you can get a slab of meat or cheese or something, or like a paving slab or a bit of concrete. Slices, a slice of pizza, a slice of a shape of something, or a lump, referring to more like the texture, the consistency. They're sort of related, but from the context, it would be a strip of light. So I'm thinking about vocab, collocations, clues in the sentence. Even when I'm reading a normal book, I can be practicing for the C1 exam. Right, that's it. That's C1 part 1. Thank you for listening. Thank you for joining me. Come back next week for C1 Use of English part 2.